Welcome back to the Big Dharma Podcast. Today, I'm joined by my old friend, Jana Roemer, who is a mother, a Yoga Nidra teacher, also, I think, a meditation teacher, an astrologer, and a self-proclaimed midwife of awakening. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. What a treat.
Yeah, so good to be here with you and catch up. We haven't chatted like this in a really long time. And I've been following along all of your work with Attune to the Moon, and I absolutely love it. I eat it all up. And it's a new moon today, isn't
It
it?
is. Yeah, we're recording on the
It
Aquarius new
is.
moon. Very apropos with
Yeah,
something tech happening on the Aquarius new moon.
right?
hmm
Right? So, what does this mean, midwife of awakening? What does that
Yeah,
mean?
you know what? It's kind of funny. I wrote that in my Instagram bio over a decade ago as kind of a joke. I was like, people ask me what I do, and I'm like, well, if I say I run 200-hour teacher trainings or 300-hour teacher trainings or Yoga Nidra trainings, that sounds like one thing, but the process is actually an awakening process. But I'm not doing it. I'm just midwifing it. I'm just there, witnessing, reflecting, helping to guide, dropping in clues for somebody to come to their own awakening. And I hold that realm, that portal really well, where people come in, and I encourage people to ask more questions than find answers as a pathway
Yeah.
to like open up into new realms of awareness. And so that's really it started kind of as a joke before I took Instagram that seriously. And then I just never changed it.
I mean, I think it suits you so well, especially when you describe it that way. We met, I think, probably like 8 or so years ago. It might be as long as 10 years ago. And I'm sure a lot has changed in your life, like it has in all of ours. And when we met, it was through Red Diamond Yoga.
Yeah.
And we were talking about having you come in to teach. I think you were new to LA at the time. So I know you have a yoga background, but like I feel as though I've been following you. There's this very metaphysical approach to life and wellness and mental health that's really dominates like all of your content. So how did that evolve? I mean, I love it. That's like my whole world is like this metaphysical understanding of the human experience. But how did that evolve for you?
Well, interestingly, I was raised on an acreage outside of a small town of 150 people with no street lights. That was like a half-hour drive away from a city. So I was in kind of a dark zone in Canada, in Saskatchewan, in the middle of nowhere. And my mother didn't raise me in a religion. She raised me more in this like animistic, there's spirit in everything. Prayer was always a part of it, but just like honoring, like even when we would plant the garden, we would, bless the seeds and, like everything was sacred. And so I grew up like that. And I spent a lot of time alone and outside in nature. And when I look back at my childhood, my childhood was just a mystical experience. I was lucid dreaming. I was visiting, all different lands. I traveled to Egypt in my dreams and then saw it in books. And I was like, that's where I go. That's where I go. And I would have these
Wow.
like really wild energetic experiences. And like my play in my energy body was really quite profound. I just thought that was normal. I
Right.
just
I was just going to say, like, how did you relate to the world knowing that, or maybe not knowing that other people weren't having the same
I
experience?
honestly didn't really realize that people weren't having these experiences until I was an adult, actually. And it didn't
Yeah.
totally shut down, like lots of people has it shut down. It did, but it didn't. Like I still had a piece of it. And I remember when I was a like later age teenager, young adult, I had this thing where I could always tell when people were cheating on their partners. Like I always knew like this like psychic kind of, I don't know. I just had that. I remember standing very specifically in this one circle, and I was like, "Oh my God, she's sleeping with him," and and I was like, I knew it all, and I said something, and I just watched the reactions of the whole thing, and then I was ostracized, and that happened a few times
Mhm.
where I would know things that I shouldn't know, and I was ostracized because of it. Um, and so when I was studying, okay, so I broke my back in 2008. And when I broke my back in
Mm.
2008, I went to this healer who was using light therapy. She would lay me down on this bed, and there were two lights, polarized lights on either side. And then she would do like just the most weird and awesome stuff. But, this is 15 years ago. that wasn't the common thing. And then she actually
No.
sent me this meditation that I now know was Dr. Joe Dispenza, where he was
Yeah.
knitting his spine using this blue light. And so she gave me an image of my spine and all the vertebra, and then to listen to this meditation, and I was knitting my spine back together through this vision.
Like visually,
Yes.
like the visualization of it, like imagining it,
Yes.
like what he talks about, like the mental rehearsal, but like imagining. Yeah.
And he
Powerful
also put
stuff.
us into a coherent state. And then I disappeared from him because I went so deep into yoga, and I was doing, all the alignment stuff. I was big in the Anusara community. And then
Yeah.
Dispenza came back into my life with Yoga Nidra. And I just went bananas for his work because I was like, oh my God, this guy
Yeah.
is talking about the scientific, like he's doing scientific studies on these experiences that I've had for so long. And and so I just went down such a deep rabbit hole with him. And by the time I found him, I was already deep with like Dr. Bruce Lipton and the biology of belief, and Greg Braden, and like the holographic universe,
Yeah.
and all of these guys. This is the science that I always was drawn to. And so okay, sure. There was a natural experience that led the way. And then I found teachers that were explaining it. And my mom was into it too. Like my mom's the one that sent me the biology of belief right around the time when I
Oh,
broke my
wow.
back. I think it was fresh out, like maybe it was 2009, like it was somewhere in that 2008, 2009 region. And I just ate it up. I was like, this is truth. This makes sense to me.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I had a similar experience exploring all of those same teachers that you just described, but my experience was a little bit of the opposite because I wasn't raised spiritual, and quite the opposite, like hyper materialism, right? And like, no concept of like higher awareness or higher self or consciousness or anything sacred, like none of that at all. And like really shutting down anything that was like, had any depth whatsoever. It was like, no. We just don't go there, It's like it made everybody uncomfortable. So I came out of this space of like having had so much repressed emotion and energy and being pretty much like unconscious, I would say, right? Like really walking around sort of dissociated, disconnected, unconscious. But then through the discovery of yoga and having all of these like metaphysical experiences that I didn't have a language for at the time, like I didn't know what was happening. I was like, what is this? Why am I having visions? Why am I feeling the sensation of like dropping into my heart, right? Like, why am I feeling better in my life? Like, why am I feeling more empowered? Why am I more present? Like all of these different things, plus the sort of psychedelic like experiences that I was having in Shavasana. And then when I started to discover these teachers, I was like, oh, that's what's happening to me. That makes sense. And then I started getting really obsessed with learning about it, really so that I could deepen my own experience and then teach it more effectively.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I was like, if I can have this, if I can wake up from the spell of trauma and all the things that happened to me through this practice, which it's really not a complicated practice, right? Like yoga is not that complicated.
Just
Like it's available
up.
to everybody. No. Yeah. And so, wow, that's so fascinating. It was all really kind of around the same time.
Yeah. I feel like there was
that
a
we
big
met.
renaissance of those teachings around like 2000, because if I'm not mistaken, I think the biology of belief was released in 2008. I just actually was looking this up because astrologically, there was Pluto in Sagittarius, and it moved into Capricorn in 2008. And I was trying to find evidence of what Pluto was doing in Sagittarius versus what Pluto was doing in Capricorn. And I just looked it up. And I think really there was like this renaissance of, sure, there was people studying this stuff behind the scenes. And like, I was really metaphysical I like skipped a whole portion into channelers. Like I remember getting the Cryon books. Are you familiar with these books? Cryon is this channeled entity. There's a guy named Lee Carroll.
Like you're not talking about Chiron, the
asteroid.
No.
That's why I corrected. I'm like, okay, Chiron, Cryon. Chiron is the asteroid. Cryon is Kryon. So my mom used to be obsessed with like Shirley MacLaine and like I forget who else, but she also was doing the Silva mind control method. Are you familiar with
Uh-huh.
that?
Yeah.
She was doing that when I was a
Yeah, a little bit.
teenager,
Yeah.
and she was doing like theta
Mhm.
healing when I was a teenager. And my aunt, who lives just around the corner from me here, she was doing like Reiki in the 80s, like therapeutic touch, they called it, or they called what she was doing. And so this stuff was all really normalized for me. But Cryon is this channeled entity of the magnetics. And so Cryon was talking about how anybody who's finding his books now are light workers. And if you're finding these books, and you would
Mm.
repeat that over, if you're reading this, you are one of us. There's a reason why you're finding this information now. And it was talking about
Yeah.
the magnetic shifts. And he was talking about the electromagnetic field. And the first Cryon books got in my hand in 2001.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I remember reading this and it just being like totally foreign language and just being like, but what is this? Like, this is
Yeah.
just amazing. And so I started to think of my body and relationships in magnetics. So, like gravity between two people or polarization, like repelling or drawing, and like the effect,
Mhm.
like if two magnetic fields come into each other, how they like share information. So like I'm such a nerd,
Mhm.
I would meet people that I thought were really fascinating and I would try to physically get close to them so that my field could
Yeah, yeah.
absorb their field. Such a
Yeah, yeah.
weirdo.
Mm.
Um,
I mean, it's a real
it's
thing,
real.
like I had Bruce Cryer on the show recently, and he's the former CEO of HeartMath.
Amazing.
And he's on the advisory board of Japa Health. And we talk all the time about the research that they've done out of HeartMath, which is so fascinating. I always tell people it's like such a wealth of sort of hidden
Yeah.
knowledge that people don't realize how magnetic we really are.
Yeah. Yeah. There's that documentary, I Am. It's quite old now. It might be almost 20 years old now. Maybe not, maybe 15.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, I am. It was the son, I believe it's the son who would be like the heir of the Procter and Gamble, like, how huge Procter and
Mm.
Gamble is. And it's his son or some relation to that. And he had his own awakening through an injury. I think it was concussions or something. And he started to go explore. And he brought in the HeartMath Institute into the I Am documentary. And they show all these really amazing studies that are just proving like what the heart is doing. And he was just like, I can't keep going down this route of whatever mainstream America is. Like through his injury, he had to depart away from it. Like money wasn't the priority. Capitalism wasn't the
Interesting. I
priority.
have to watch it.
Yeah, it's old and it's great. I used to make that recommended watching in my trainings.
I love that.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I mean, there's so much stuff that's old that's great. I mean, have you come across the Bringers of the
Of
Dawn?
course. Yeah, that was part of my teacher train, like 2010, 11, 12, 13. I would be like, Kate, make sure you listen to this.
Yeah, and I mean that book I think came out in the early
Yeah.
80s, and it's like literally life is a library of light.
Yeah.
And it talks about everything that we're experiencing now that's now starting to become a little bit more mainstream. And I mean, they had access to that, whoever that group of people were that brought that out had access to that information
Yeah.
then, so
Well, when you look at like
um
indigenous teachings, it's all coded in a lot of the indigenous
yeah,
teachings. Like when you
yeah.
go really deep, I've been really fortunate to be quite close with different indigenous teachers over my lifetime. And the deeper you get in, it's like the Star Nations. They realize that our ancestors, like we came from the stars. And when you start to get into
Mhm.
the Star Nations teachings, it's so expansive because it's so much more than just this like limited Earth experience. Like there's an expanded consciousness and beings that live all over this beautiful universe that we're in. And we are seeded from the Star Nations here on Earth. And who knows? I remember studying Buddhism and this wheel of samskara, like the karma and reincarnation,
Mhm.
and you come back again and again. So I had this idea that I could only reincarnate back on planet Earth. And then I went to this Star Nations conference, and this teacher was sharing how you can incarnate into other solar systems or like other star clusters. And I was like, oh, like that was a mind-boggling
Yeah,
thing. Like, oh my God, I thought I was stuck on Earth forever. And they're like, no.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it like, we obviously we don't know what's what's true and what's not true, right? Of the afterlife or the before life. That's all philosophy or theory or who knows. But even just this concept of that there's more out there for me
Hmm.
was so expansive. And I remember just thinking, so what meditation do I need to work on to incarnate somewhere else next time? Because this place is
Yeah, to
so
go exploring.
bonkers.
To go exploring. Yeah. Did you find one?
No, not really. But what I love, my favorite, when I started looking to find other lineages of Yoga Nidra, in Buddhism, they have their laying down practices, and they're all for the realm between, like it's all preparation for death, so that as you move through different
Hmm.
states of consciousness, your awareness, like your, in Buddhism, of course, they call it the mind, but I can say soul because that works for me, that my soul is awake and present through any expression of consciousness through any realm ever. And that's really where I started to get quite obsessed with the practice of Yoga Nidra, because most of us, we go unconscious when we fall asleep. But if in Yoga
Yeah.
Nidra, you're letting the body fall asleep while remaining aware of that process of falling asleep. And then how can you get so badass at keeping awareness online in any environment, situation, transition, challenge, to stay aware and not be going
Yeah.
into trauma response or
Like to
unconscious
not just go
or
unconscious.
unconscious. Exactly. And so when
Yeah.
I got that little piece of information, I was like, this is for me, this is going to be my most important practice this lifetime. How to stay aware no matter what the circumstances.
So then you started practicing Yoga Nidra yourself, and then you decided, okay, this is what I'm going to teach.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
got
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
initiated actually. So I went and trained with my original teacher. Her name is Tanis Fishman, and she's up in Calgary, Canada. And so I had been teaching for a while. And when I moved down to LA, there really wasn't a lot of Yoga Nidra going on. There was
Hmm.
Tracy Stanley. There was, oh my God, I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. I can see his face so clearly. Anyways, through the I Am, John Vossler.
Hmm.
And then there was Rod Stryker, and so Rod Stryker
Hmm.
wasn't in LA though, he's in Colorado. So there was a little bit, but the studios weren't teaching, they didn't have Yoga Nidra on the schedule. And so that became kind of my mission, was to get Yoga Nidra on the schedule. And I did, and it was awesome. But
But everybody wanted the opposite at the time. Everybody wanted, because I was part of that, and
yeah,
I had my studio. Everybody wanted the vigorous,
yeah, yeah,
athletic
sweat.
based, strength building, sweaty, like one breath per movement, moving meditation type of practice. And I loved, I mean, my practice has changed so much. I loved that. That's what I based all my teaching on, because it was that moving meditation with some elements of stillness
Mhm.
that really got me into that bliss point.
Well, the way that I snuck it in is I would teach a 90-minute class, which are also dinosaurs now. Like nobody does a
Right.
90-minute class anymore.
We spend time. That's my favorite. I'll do a 2 hour and
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh, I'm just in heaven.
So
Yeah.
I would do a 90-minute class, and the first 55 minutes would be, I would just make them sweat. Like I wanted the walls dripping in a non-heated
Steaming.
studio,
Yeah.
as much,
Yeah.
and like really fun sequencing and hard, like core work and a good playlist. And it made it super fun.
Hmm.
And then as soon as they were basically begging for me to stop, I drop them into a Yoga Nidra.
When's the stretching part?
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
class was like
Yeah.
pumping. It was awesome. Like even it was
Mhm.
featured in like Vogue magazine. Like that one class at Love Yoga
Mhm.
Studio was awesome. And now I believe, I might be wrong, but last I checked, they still had that style of class on their schedule, which is great. I feel really good about that. But then some people started to ask if I would teach the practice, like teach them how to teach Yoga Nidra, especially the teachers that were coming to my class. And I had included it in a 300-hour training that I had done. But I hadn't done it as a standalone. And my little small me was like, I can't do this. So I arranged for my teacher to come down from Canada, and we were going to co-facilitate. And I was like putting myself into like a mentorship situation with my teacher by having
Yeah.
her come, like that was, for me, I've always really loved having a mentor. A mentor has always been really important to me. And like 6 weeks before the training, we were sold out, 33 people. We rented this amazing house in Venice. And 6 weeks before, there was an accident in her family, and she had two little kids, and her partner had I think he chopped off the tops of his fingers. And so he couldn't even do up his own pants. She was like, I can't come. And I was like,
Oh
oh my
no.
God, what am I going to do? Like, and she was like, they're all coming because of you. You're going to run the training and you're going to do great. And if you have questions, I'm here for you. But like, this is yours. And so I don't think I ever would have done it without that original, like, my teacher's going to come
Yeah,
and
yeah.
run the training. And that training was magical. It was outrageous. You know how you go into these psychedelic experiences in Shavasana? I would be
Mhm.
guiding the practice, and I sit while I'm guiding. And so I'm sitting in, like, cross-legged seated position at the front of the room, eyes closed, because everybody's eyes are closed. They don't really need to watch. It's not like a yoga active
Right.
practice where I'm moving and adjusting. So I'm sitting there, and if there was any weird sounds, I might open my eyes, but I have my eyes closed. And I do the body scan, which is coherence, like creating coherence in the body. And all of a sudden I was having these like really wild mystical experiences where, like, I would feel energy moving up my spine. My heart would just start pounding. I thought I was having a heart attack the first time. And then it just exploded up, went into this white place. And all of a sudden I am now inside my body and I'm being shown what to say, how to guide the practice. And then I move out of the
Mm.
body and into this like other realm. It was like I was on DMT, except for
Yeah, but like fully channeling.
fully sober. Yeah, fully just opened the field. And I say the goddess Yoga Nidra or the teachings started to teach through me, like it was full surrender. And one of my groups of teachers for a long time was the International Council of the 13 Indigenous Grandmothers. And if you know who they are, then you know who they are. But these women essentially came together through prophecy, 13 medicine women from 13 different cultures around the world. And I'd go study and they would run ceremony and do all kinds of amazing work. And there was one from Tibet who, the beginning of her ceremony, every single time, she would just say, I know nothing. I'm empty. I know nothing. I'm innocent. I'm like she would just empty out completely. And then this woman would walk in to the ceremony circle on with a walker, and then she would lay down on the ground after she would do this big invocation of I know nothing, I'm innocent, goddess use me, goddess use me. And she would get up and be able to run, like her whole body was taken over. And so I just, at the beginning of guiding the practice, I do that every single time. I'm like, I know nothing, use me, let me be empty, work through me.
That's so powerful
Mm-hmm.
because we try so hard to control everything that we create.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have to enforce our will on it. Do you know what I mean? I see you're laughing. And that idea of letting go and surrender and trusting that what's going to come through you is exactly what's meant to come through
That's
you
right.
is it's like such an act of courage.
Yeah.
But every time I've ever done anything like that is when I feel like it's my absolute best work. And it's when it's the most well received by the
Oh,
students.
100%.
Every time.
So every single practice of that training, I did that. And every single practice, I had a mystical experience. And that training, it was taught through me. And it became the foundation of my 60 hour, it's actually an 80-hour Yoga Nidra training. And that's how I guide the practice. So I don't even own the practices as mine, really. I'm
Right,
like,
right, right, right. They're just
sometimes
like
I go
from
back.
source. But
Yeah, I go back and I do the practices and I'm like, who thought of that? Like, what is that?
it's all in the field, right? It's all, I mean, we can get into Akashic and all that stuff, but I feel like there's some people that they may listen to this that don't actually know what Yoga Nidra is. So I think we should take a minute to just, yeah, we should explain exactly what the practice is. What are the benefits? How do you do it?
Yeah.
Where did it originate from?
Okay, I might have just made it sound totally bonkers, but it's the most simple, the most accessible. Literally, if you can hear, you can do this. The practice is done laying down. So like Shavasana, laying down on your back. Although if you have back problems or if you're pregnant, you can lay in the fetal position. I also really love sometimes doing it on my belly, especially if I'm feeling really tender or vulnerable. Just lay on my belly with like
Mm,
maybe a knee and an arm up, and
yeah,
I can turn my head to one side, or even in like a recliner chair. So it's so accessible that way. Any body can do it. And then what happens inside the practice, you would hit a recording, or if you're in a studio, the teacher would start to speak. And then you listen and you just do what is asked of you. And what's asked of you generally follows three main principles. One is your breathing is so relaxed that it's like you're being breathed, but essentially we're moving breath. You can consciously breathe, right? Like we do breath work where we're actively choosing a breath pattern. but this isn't that. You just let breath be natural. Like, no effort around breath, the most effortless breath. So you can forget about breathing. You're just there. So that's the first
Mm-hmm.
thing. The second thing is that a good guide will take you through a practice where you create coherence in the nervous system. So generally what it is most people are familiar with proprioception, to be aware of your external environment. So I'm sitting at my
Mm-hmm.
desk, I can see that you're on a screen, and to the left of me is a new computer that I need to set up, and to the right of me is the calendar, and across from me is my bookshelf. Like, this is my proprioception. Behind me is a wall. I'm aware of what's around me. I can hear that my dog is outside of my door right now. These are all
Mm-hmm.
proprioception. If there was traffic, maybe, like noises outside of the house, you could hear that. That's all proprioception. Interoception is the
Mm-hmm.
awareness of your inner realm. And that is a huge learning curve for a lot of people, because most people don't spend the time feeling and
Yeah.
listening to what's going on inside of their body. And it's actually quite simple. Like, if everybody wants to just for a moment close your eyes and place your hands on your thighs and feel your left thumb touching your thigh, and then actually just feel your left thumb. And take a moment to like really feel your left thumb. You can notice your skin, but can you actually feel the bone inside of your skin? And then we would systematically move through the body from there. And there's a lot of science that backs this up. So your hands have more gray matter dedicated to the sensory experience of your hands than, let's say, the middle of the back of your heart, right? Like, it's easier to feel
Mm-hmm.
your thumb or the palm of your hands or your fingertips than it is to feel your kidneys, right?
Yeah.
So we
Yeah. Yeah.
use body parts specifically that have a higher touch sensitivity to it, and we spend time in there, and then from that you can start to feel into your arm and up through your collarbone and across to your other arm, like we move through the body. And then your face also has really high sensory awareness as well, so we can do body scans that are just like going into your face, like your tongue and your teeth. Like, think of how
Your like
much.
upper palate and like the back of your throat, and
Yes.
all of these things are so powerful. And I feel so strongly that people with chronic disease have just many times over, maybe for decades at a time, missed the signals that are happening inside of them and haven't been able to adjust their behaviors, their attitudes, their perceptions, their language, their food, like everything, because they've missed the
Yeah.
cues, because they've not tuned in. So just, I always imagine what's possible if we could get more people to tap in this way.
Yeah. So what we do is we use the places that are more obvious. Like, most people have a relationship with touch with their hands or with their mouth because
Mm-hmm.
you're eating. Like, as a
Yeah.
child, that's the first thing, you're like, hand to mouth. Like, that's,
Yeah. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
those are your first two
Right.
sensory awareness. But then as you get good at those, then you can start to feel into other areas of the body. Like, now I can feel my lungs, I can feel my heart, I can feel my liver, I can feel my kidneys, I can feel all the way through
Mm-hmm.
my colon. Ask me that 20 years ago, the answer would have been no. But over time, with
Right.
consistent practice. But the point of that, though, as you're activating your interoception, you're there's a thing in your mind, you can either, in your brain, you can either think or you can feel. You can think about what you just felt, but generally you can't think and feel simultaneously. So in the practice, the
Fascinating.
guidance gets you so deep into the feeling body that the thinking kind of stops. And then the nervous system, now all attention is inside of the body instead of outside of the body. And when we look at the
Mm-hmm.
yoga, like the 8 limbs of yoga, there's pratyahara. And pratyahara
Mm-hmm.
is going from the external world to the internal world. And that's where the practice begins. So now we've got the
Yeah.
nervous system in this coherent state, meaning it's one focused inward. And then I ask you to evoke different emotions. Now, when you're coherent, your endocrine system cannot release stress hormones. It's impossible. It's not the way that the hormones morph like one to the next. You can't, if you're coherent, you can't actually produce stress hormones. So I can ask you in this state to feel a polarity of emotion, let's say I've been actually playing a lot with grief and love, right? Like grief is an uncomfortable emotion, but it is because you love so much that you even feel grief in the first place, right? Or
Right.
resentment and forgiveness, or pleasure or pain. Like all of these, they're the same, but they're on opposite ends of the polarity. And I can ask you then to feel in like pendulate back and forth between these opposite emotional experience, or even we could go physical, like to feel your body as heavy or to feel your body as light. And as we're doing this, maybe the less desirable, like maybe the grief is less desirable, but you can actually feel what grief feels like without a stress hormone. You can feel what resentment feels like without a stress hormone. And so you get to feel what vulnerable grief feels like, or what vulnerable resentment feels like in your own little world without anybody interrupting that experience. And then you also feel the opposite. So you can feel forgiveness, or you can feel love, or you can feel pleasure, or you can, like, and what happens when you're doing this is you're rewiring the neuroplasticity of the brain. And I call it somatics for the endocrine system, or somatics for the mind, because you're pendulating back and forth between what could typically be thought of as like a trauma response and a healing response, or whatever the opposite is. But when you're playing with the neuroplasticity, the intellect is much slower than the intuition or the primal urges of the body. And so I love the example of like, maybe it's the deal in your house that one partner takes out the garbage and the other partner cleans up the kitchen, or whatever. Let's just say it's like division of chores. And if the one partner is not doing their division of chores, you would maybe start to build up resentment every time you come to the garbage, you're having to do it instead of them, right?
Yeah.
But then you've done this response alteration in your own mind, in your own endocrine system, in your nervous system, and you're already forgiving them before your intellect is ready to get mad at them, right? And so it's like you are helping yourself to be able to stay centered more often in your life. So it's not getting that guy off the hook or the other person off the hook. It's the way that you manage when things don't go right. And I have to say, like, over the last 4 years that the world has gone, 5 years that the world has kind of lost its mind in whatever way, it has been the most beneficial practice of my lifetime, because I can stay centered and I can adjust my behavior, or I can adjust my expectations of other people. But the other thing that I've noticed, and I'll finish the Yoga Nidra in a second, I just want to talk about the benefits because I hear this from people all the time. The other thing that I've noticed is that we're so psychically connected, right? So if I'm holding resentment against my partner, even if I don't say it out loud, he's already reacting to my internal state. And I can hold this like pretty face and be like, everything's fine. But we're so connected that he would feel it, right? But if I'm already forgiving him before I have a chance to get the resentment to come online, I've noticed in my marriage, in my partnership, both of us are stepping up our game naturally.
Yeah. Like it's unspoken because it's just felt.
It's
Like you're actually sending that signal.
yeah,
Yeah, that's powerful.
yeah.
That's so
It's so
powerful.
powerful. And I've noticed also conflict resolution is so different, because maybe a younger version of us in marriage would elevate quite a bit. In any time there's
Yeah.
conflict, they'd be like one up, one up, one up, and all of a sudden it's like this big fight. Where now, and my husband also he has his own practice. So I'm very fortunate to have a man who's like doing
Yeah,
this as well.
very. Yeah.
But we're able to like connect in at that more in a more coherent place more frequently. And I noticed that if he notices that I'm dysregulated, he comes in and regulates instead of escalates. Or if I notice he's
Yeah.
more dysregulated and he might be a little bit sloppy, or I might be a little bit sloppy, like if my stress is big and I'm short, I'll be like, oh, wait. Or he'll be like, oh, wait, it's my turn to ground. And then we, just like the parent-child relationship of co-regulation, now we're doing that for each other instead of escalating. Do you get what I'm saying?
I mean, imagine a world where leadership is about embodied awareness
Right.
and not about even what we say.
Right.
Like, it doesn't have to be done with this like direct, forceful, external behavior.
Yeah.
It's just the embodiment of the energetic blueprint that we want the world to be like. I actually really believe this is the future. I
I think
think
it is.
you and I having this conversation now is interesting because I feel like maybe even by like 2030,
I think faster.
this is going to you
I
think
think
faster
faster,
than
yeah.
that? Do you think in
Astrologically, I think
in the next 5 years?
I do.
Yeah, I want to hear your take on that because I feel like, consciousness is shifting so fast. Everything is happening so fast now.
Okay, so let's just back up a second to finish the Yoga Nidra, because I want to. So then after we do
Yeah.
these opposites, then we go back into a coherent place, and you can literally do anything you want. So, I mean, I've got over 200 recordings of Yoga Nidra now that are available in different places. But like, we'll do everything from like travel back to a time when you were a child, or I do another one where you travel to the future. Like, if you have a problem in this moment and you're like, how do I solve this problem? Inside the practice, you go and you connect with your inner elder, and you go get advice from the future you that's already experienced the today now problem.
I have a meditation like that too, like a meet your future self meditation. It's been one of my most powerful practices of my life.
Yes. And so, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of there's a lot of different things you can go into healing. I did one, I was actually at a Joe Dispenza retreat, and he does these coherence healings, and I was recording at the retreat center. And so at the end, you lay yourself down and you imagine like 8 different saints or healers coming around you with their hands, just like projecting healing energy on you. Like, there's so many different ways that you can play with it.
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah.
and then we use what's called Sankalpa, which is like a message to your higher self. And that also rewrites these old programs or beliefs. Like if somebody has an inherent belief of a lack of worth, you could reprogram worthiness or that you are valid into your system. So lots of kids, and I mean adults, but like the kid in you was told they were wrong or criticized, and we have this feeling of
Everybody
wrongness,
at some level.
right?
Yeah.
And it's pervasive, and it becomes this huge block for people. They're like, oh, I can't do that, I'm wrong, like I'll never get it right, or and so we can program like into your mind that you're capable, or that it's okay to have
I just
fun.
had this conversation. I just had this conversation with, I'm going to call her out right now, my youngest sister, she was just telling me the other day that she wants to lose weight. And she was like, I can't be like you. I'm not strong like you. I can't do it. I'm not strong. She kept saying it over. You don't understand. I'm not like you. And I'm like, well, forget about for a minute the things that you have to do in order to achieve the goal and start with maybe just affirming that you can do things.
Yeah.
Like, let's just start there.
You have
Like,
to go
let's just,
deeper.
you know?
Like, that's why when in the
Mhm.
subconscious mind, you're in a deeper place. It's
Yeah.
actually called a hypnagogic state. And so you're rewriting the program at the root. So these are the potentials.
Mhm.
Like, it's so you can say it a million times, but we know that that's not going to change the underlying feeling. You have to get to the underlying feeling. And then you come out of the
Yeah.
practice. And hopefully, when you do this on repeat, it starts to change your external world. And it does. It's really amazing. So,
Yeah, I've had the personal experience of it. How do you feel when it first started coming out? I mean, I felt a little bit icky about it,
about
but
what?
Andrew Huberman talks about non-sleep deep rest. And I'm like, stop just trying to rebrand Yoga Nidra. And, like, I mean, he comes across as very authoritative because of his background and, Stanford, and he's got sort of this very like masculine presence. So people that haven't been exposed to these ancient teachings
Yeah.
don't know that there is this ancient wisdom behind it.
Oh, I think it's so funny that like I mean, I say this in my trainings too, like Dispenza and Huberman come out and they're doing like the laying down meditation in Dispenza's work or the non-sleep deep rest in Huberman's work simultaneously at the exact same time as people are like, do not participate in cultural appropriation. I'm like, these dudes are like
Right.
the worst. Like the worst.
They're the worst because they don't give any credit whatsoever.
Zero.
They don't even say like where they got the inspiration.
Yeah.
Like they have skipped that part. And it's like, well, did you make it up? You didn't make it up.
You didn't make it up. But the
You
thing
didn't
is,
make that up.
I actually really appreciate both of them, right? Because there is this one
Mhm.
side that's like, please honor lineage, please. But like, Andrew Huberman is meeting, and Dispenza are both meeting an audience of human beings that would never come to these practices through woo, right? Like through spirituality
right.
or through yoga, or where we found it through yoga. And I really appreciate it. And the part of my mind that loves science, like I'm about to up-level my Yoga Nidra training, and I'm literally going into Andrew Huberman's research to be like, this is what's happening. Like this. And
Yeah,
so
like what parts of the brain are doing these things, and
exactly. So these guys are pioneering this validation of a mystical experience through the scientific model, which I love because so many people need that. So many people are like, yeah, that sounds great, but then you throw a study in front of them and they're like, okay, I'll listen. All right.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that there's a real need for the validation, because a lot of people don't appreciate subtle energy. Like it has to be something they can like see and touch, right? Um, and I think that happens to men, I think, more than women.
Some women know too,
So
like
it's
any
interesting.
analytical mind, but you're right, it is more men. And that's why these are men.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say, right? So it's like these very sort of alpha, logical, masculine men that probably wouldn't have wandered into like your Yoga Nidra class at
Never.
Love Yoga, right? Like, yeah. So at first I was also a little bit bothered by it, because I was like, come on, give yoga some credit. But I hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm grateful.
Yeah. I think through a more united conversation where we can talk about like purely the mystical experiences and then the science behind it, I think we can all advance the understanding together.
Yeah.
Like we can all go deeper together.
And you know what else?
So then,
Go ahead.
oh, tell me.
I was going to say, I did notice too that sometimes I'll come across people in spiritual communities who are afraid of going too deep, right? They're like, they, especially with Yoga Nidra, like I've had people come to me and confess, like, I had this one experience, it was really profound, and it absolutely terrified me at the same time, because I don't know where I was, or like that didn't make sense to me. It was such a foreign experience to their waking, walking life. And I found with those people, when I introduce them to some of Joe's work, or they come through my training where I share a lot of the science, or I give them like a podcast. Andrew Huberman did an incredible podcast with Non-Sleep Deep Rest. Joe's better though, because Dr. Joe takes people to the mystical experience with his stuff. But they listen to that and they're unafraid to go back to that place again, because it has an explanation, And so it for some people, it helps to create safety. And we know that for that kind of surrender and letting go, safety is a precursor. Not everybody has high safety needs, but the people that do, they're like, oh, my mind is so brilliant and intelligent. The only reason I'm actually having this mystical experience is because everything is right in my world.
So they don't feel crazy. Yeah. They're like, oh, I'm not going crazy. I didn't just like have a psychotic experience. Yeah. Like this is just part of it.
And it's also, it's very rare, like extremely rare, for it to open up a big trauma that you're incapable of dealing with, right? Because the mind is so crazy intelligent. That's why the mind does all the things like disassociation and all, like like repressed memories and all that stuff. The mind is so intelligent. It is here to protect you. So it's going to do everything it can to protect you. And then when you set yourself up to move life force and move energy in a new way, you'll have these releases, and you might get a vision during the release, but you don't need to make sense of it. You don't need to relive it. Right. You just get to be free of it because you felt it through to its completion, right? And you can release it. And maybe you get some insights along the way that then serve you in another way, right? So
yeah, and it's arguably so much safer if you're talking about trying to accomplish an altered state of consciousness and to access deeper parts of your subconscious, deeper parts of your traumas, and release things. It's a lot more gentle than, say, ayahuasca or any other entheogen. Any other entheogen that's going to just blast you off into this alternate dimension where you really do lose control.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and you're in that experience for several hours. Yes. It's not like you can go, okay, I want out off this ride. I want off this ride. Yeah. Right. Whereas like in this Yoga Nidra experience, you can just get up.
You can just get up. Yep.
You can just get up.
If it's too intense, you just open your eyes, shake your body, reset,
Yeah.
you're good.
Yeah. You can get off the ride.
Yes, you can get
So,
off the ride. Yeah.
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 So I love it. I think it's very powerful.
It's
You
very
also, the question that I interrupted, you said like, where are we going astrologically? Do you think we're going to be more psychic by
Yeah. Like,
2030?
yeah, just because you mentioned that you think we're going to get to this greater collective consciousness faster. I am so interested in hearing your perspective on this because I am not educated on astrology. It's like, it's something that I deeply believe in and resonate with, but I always lean on people that are experts like yourself, right? It's something that if I probably were to do another training, it would probably be like next on my list of things to really explore and dive into. I haven't carved out the time for that. But how did you get into it? And was that like ongoing the whole time of this journey, or was it after Yoga Nidra? Like, what really piqued your interest? And then I want to hear all the juice about it. Where are we astrologically? What's happening?
So the short
What can we
version is I
expect?
came to it kind of by mistake. My really, like I said, I grew up in kind of like a dark area, so the sky was always something that I really resonated with. My dad always said, like when I think he's dead now, so I can't ask him, but I'm not sure if he said you were a twinkle in my eye or you were a twinkle in the sky, and that he would always refer to when life existed before me. But I heard when you were just a twinkle in the sky. And so I had this belief as a little child that I came from the stars. And whenever I was, yeah, I had a really hard social life as a little girl. I still find challenge in social environments. It's not like it doesn't come as easy to me, but I would go to the sky, like that's what I did. I always just went to the sky. And I started paying attention for my own interest. And I had somebody who was, she didn't talk about astrology all the time in yoga classes, but she would bring in the solstices and the equinoxes and the full moon and the new moon, and just enough that it was like, oh, these cycles are really beautiful. And I had
Yeah.
somebody point me towards like the Celtic wheel, and I had somebody point me towards, so it was like, it kept finding me. It kept like coming around. And then I was blogging the new moons. I started incorporating into my classes, and I was blogging the new moons and full moons. And a friend, I was like, could you look at my chart for me? I'm really in a bit of a stuck place. I'd love for you to help me understand. I was like, I don't do charts. She was like, but could you just, like, you have enough. Can you just see what you see? And I was like, okay, I guess, but like, don't take this seriously. I was like so dismissive of it. And before I knew it, I was reading what I saw, and she got really quiet, and she's not a quiet person. And all of a sudden I look over and she's got tears streaming down her face. And she was like, I've never felt so seen in my life. You need to do this for people. And my experience, when I look at a chart, it actually turns into this like holographic kind of visual for me. Like, there's the planets are in the chart, but they'll like pop out to me. It's almost like they like come off the screen at me, like pay attention to me. And what am I doing? And it's a very interactive experience. And I also get like I'm starting to call them audio notes, where I just like start to hear something almost.
You're like clairaudient.
Yeah, it's just like this little audio note that I'll just say, and they're like, yes. I'm like, okay. And so it was really kind of innocent the way that astrology came to me. But when I look at my chart, I have like such strong pattern recognition, and like there's things that just make sense. And then I've been like, I'm a very spiritual person. Sometimes when I say this, people think like that's too atheistic or too mechanical, but I've been really fascinated because I love quantum physics and quantum biology and just light and earth and all of this, the electromagnetic field. And I've been really interested in people talking about like simulation theory. And simulation theory to me isn't atheistic, actually. It's more like a metaphor of understanding the language of source, like the language of creator, because we live in this fractal universe, right? Like you can see it in like Chinese medicine, how they can look at your ear and see like your whole body, or they can look at your tongue and see your whole body. Like in one helix of DNA, you can understand so much. In one drop of the ocean, you can understand the whole ocean. Like we're in this fractal universe. And so there's clearly rules, right? Like there's the rules of the quantum, or you look at like sacred geometry. I've been so like Greg Braden, he kind of, right? Like, and then Drumflow, Melchizedek, and all of these old teachers that I used to watch, and understanding the torus field. And you see these patterns, this sacred geometry pattern. And so a simulation theory really makes sense to me from like an intellectual point of view, and also as a way to get closer to understanding source, creator, God, whatever you want to name the unnameable. And to me, astrology is a piece of that simulation theory, because the planets are like, they're like gears, right? And each one is like its own character, right? Like Saturn is this lord of karma whose tool is time, like Kronos, and very serious and wants you to grow up. And Venus is
Mm-hmm.
harmony and relationships and love and money. And it's they each have their own very definable characteristics to them. And when they come into these sacred geometrical patterns, their conversation gets stronger. So if Saturn and Venus are in a strong conversation, which would mean an angle, like a square, a 90-degree angle, or a trine, which is a 60-degree angle, then their conversation changes based off the angle. So now we're using math as a language to understand relationship, essentially between these entities, that then influence us here on Earth. And our behavior on Earth is also influencing other
Mm-hmm.
planets, other solar systems, their astrology, right? So what we're learning is Earth astrology, right? Like, but if we lived on Jupiter, there would be a different astrology. And so for me, and the other thing that's so helpful about astrology is that it's predictable where a planet will be at a particular time and place. So I can pull up a calendar for 2030, January 1st, 2030, and I can see the energetics based off the position of the planets and who's in a conversation with who, as in like what planet
Uh-huh.
is in a geometric angle with the others. And then you can look back over history and you can see when Pluto and Uranus are in a trine, culture shifts.
Yeah.
And that happens very rarely. Like the last Pluto Uranus trine was during the 60s. And look at how changing the 60s were. And in 2026, we're going to have Uranus and Pluto in a trine again. And this time it's in the realm of Gemini and Aquarius. And that's all the mind and the relationships and the supra consciousness of Aquarius. It's like the supra consciousness, the 40,000 foot overview, where you can tap into everything, right? And so I can see in 2026, those two gears are going to get, those two planets, those two gears are going to be in a relationship with each other. And we inevitably, are, as a humanity globally, are going to respond to those two planets grinding it out together at 60 degrees. That's a really favorable change. So I'm like, right now, this year, oh my God, it's everything
Yeah.
changing. There's more.
Yeah. Tell me this year. Like, I want to know what can we expect?
You can expect that you cannot predict this year. You can expect, the only thing that I am encouraging people for 2025 is to get so deeply in your heart that you can even have compassion for your enemies. To be so pure in your
Mm.
thought that if everybody was telepathic, you wouldn't be worried about what they're hearing going on in your mind. That's the homework for 2025, because we are changing, and the change this year is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. It's changing on a level that, like, so the outer planets, Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, they typically will change signs one at a time. And they spend a long time in a sign. Like Pluto, for example, moved into Aquarius in January of this year, and it will stay there till 2023. And then it retrogrades back and forth between Pisces and Aquarius.
No, not
Oh, sorry,
2023.
2030, 2043.
23.
Yeah. And it finally
2043.
leaves
So,
Aquarius in
okay.
2044. So we've got 20 years. 19
I
years.
see.
19 years. Well, it started moving into Aquarius in 2024, last year. So it's actually 20 years where Pluto will be in Aquarius. Where Neptune, it's like 12 years, and Uranus is like 8 years, right? It changes all the time. Pluto will be as short as 8 years in Leo and as long as 20 years in Aquarius, because the orbit is shaped more like an egg than a circle, right?
Mhm,
Again, still
mhm.
predictable. Like we know the way that we know its path.
Right.
And they typically move one at a time. So one aspect, like Pluto is Uranus is innovation, creative genius, it's awakening. It's also tyranny and dictatorship. It's also like, it's also like very unpredictable, spontaneous, like disruptive energy. Neptune is very dreamy. It's lots of illusion. It's also universal love. It's psychic realms. Pluto is the underworld. It's death, transformation, and rebirth. So and then depending on what sign it's in, there'll be a theme. So typically that's one every couple years. 2025, they're all moving. All of them. Everything.
So is that like the translation that I hear is chaos if they're all moving at once?
We could call it that. And we could call it that because Saturn is in Pisces for half of the year, and Pisces is the queen of chaos. Sorry, I love all my Pisces, but like that's where we see the most chaos. Virgo also carries a lot of chaos, but they're in a polarity.
I have a lot of Virgo.
Yeah, they're in a polarity from each other. Pisces
Gotcha.
and Virgo. So there's a lot of chaos along that line. But anywhere Uranus so Uranus, remember I said Uranus is like the great awakener, the creative genius, but also innovation, technology, currency. We can put money in there. But currency, not money. Like your currency is like everybody has their own currency, right? That translates into money as an exchange for that currency, but like currency. And then also those, last time we saw Uranus in Gemini was World War II. And Gemini is the fastest changing archetype because it's the mind, but it's the mutable mind. It's mutable air, so the changing mind. And you see this is why Geminis get such a bad rap on the internet, because they change their minds all the time. But also what it actually is it's the flexibility of mind to be in any environment and find curious and still be curious in that environment. Like a Gemini might be in a conversation with somebody on the right politically and be super interested and actually agree, and then be in a conversation with somebody on the left politically and be super interested and also agree. But there's all this space in between. But they're, like you just show up and like can be anywhere. So
I feel like that's a really important archetype.
It's
to like sort of be a bridge.
Yes. And that's another word that is coming up because Jupiter has been in Gemini and will be in Gemini till the summer, and then it's going to move into Cancer. And as it moves into Cancer, Uranus is going to spend a little bit of time in Gemini. So we have this really fast changing, and look what happened politically. How many people changed political sides this year,
it's
yeah. And so
hard to even keep track.
You can't keep track. That's the other theme is don't try. You're not going to be able to keep up, especially with AI, right? Like we've got Uranus in Gemini, Uranus is technology, AI is Aquarius, and we've got Pluto in Aquarius. And then we have the two of them in a conversation in a harmony, like a harmonizing trine. And so the speed at which technology is going to be changing, we're just at the tip of the iceberg of the volume of change that we're going to see in technology. And I get really excited about all the technological advances in like our healthcare, like you and I.
Me too.
Yeah. And just like that returning to, there's two sides. One is like, how much can we advance through tech? And another side is how much can we advance through remembering our nature, right? Like, and just really aligning with our nature. But
yeah. So where do you think we'll be in 2030 if you think that this acceleration of consciousness is going to happen by then? Like this idea that so many more people are becoming not just aware, like we were talking about interoception, right? And I said, imagine a world where more people were like living this embodied blueprint, right? And intentional about their inner experience and intentional about their energy. So what will that look like?
It's hard to say. But have you listened to this podcast, the telepathy tapes?
Yes, I'm like, I think on episode 4 or 5 now.
Okay, it keeps getting better. It's so good. But this comes out as Pluto is coming into Aquarius. And if you haven't listened to the telepathy tapes, really short version, it's basically like a study of telepathy on a very particular demographic of individuals, which are non-speaking, non-verbal, autistic humans. And they're like 100% accurate in their telepathy. Like the studies basically are making it so that you cannot deny that these people are telepathic. And then I'll save the rest for you to actually listen to the podcast. The first one's slow. Don't give up on the first one. Keep going.
Oh, I didn't actually find it slow, but it did get better and
It
better.
gets better.
But I feel like those of us that have studied, ancient philosophy and the mystical teachings, from, different cultures and different parts of the world have heard this before,
Absolutely.
right?
But this,
Yeah, so we're not
but
surprised.
this just became the #1 podcast in the world. And so people
I
who are
know.
not thinking about this, they're bringing telepathy into their awareness and what's possible. Like they're talking about things that we've been talking about for a long time, like a field of consciousness, the morphogenetic field. They're talking about lucid
Akashic
dreaming. They're talking
records.
about,
Yeah.
yes,
Mhm.
exactly, the library of information.
Yeah.
They're talking about like medical intuitive, medical intuitive. Anyways, like all these concepts, but they're talking about it as fact, right? And
Right.
so I think that podcast, along with people's own experience, because it's like the 5-minute mile, right? Like nobody thought it was
Yeah, oh, for sure.
possible.
I knew you were going to go there.
Right.
Right.
Nobody
Yeah.
thought it was possible to run a 5-minute mile, and then one person does it, and all of a sudden so many people started doing it immediately afterwards. And even
Yes.
like I've been raving about the telepathy tapes, and I'm getting all these DMs like, I had a telepathic moment, and my friends are visiting, and she was like, telepathy, like we're just
Yeah.
and so it's coming into, and now if more people are watching for their telepathy, and then we have Saturn and
That's
Uranus
right.
coming into this trine, and it's happening more and more and more. And then we have like,
Mhm.
maybe the next version of the telepathy tapes is just on regular everyday people instead of this one demographic, because I could see some people listening to it and be like, well, I'm not autistic, so that's not me. But if they continued, and I
Right.
don't know what they're doing, I don't know these people, but just as a
Sure.
potential, if more studies come out with people that are experiencing these psychic moments or have audio notes or have, like my husband does Reiki, and he can tell where in the body the person's ailment is, like even at a
Mhm.
distance. He did a Reiki session, and
Yeah.
he said to the woman, she just said she was sick. She didn't say what with. And he was like, something's going on in your colon. And she's like, I'm so embarrassed. I never wanted to say, but I have Crohn's and colitis. And so I was having a big IBS moment. And
Yeah.
he was like, yeah, I could feel it. And so like, that's his way of, it's all interoceptive. And so the more people talk about
My partner always just says, like, I don't know, how are you such a witch? Like whenever I pinpoint things like that, or I know something, or I feel something, or like, even if I just put my hand on him and he happens to be sore in like a specific spot, he's like, how did you know that?
because you can feel it.
And it's exactly.
Yeah.
You can feel it.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
the more we talk about it, it's going to accelerate. It's going to accelerate this
Yes.
progress. So I think, sure, 2030, that's a great, like, out there, but I think it'll be faster. I think it'll be like 2027, 2028. Like as Pluto and Uranus have that trine, and then like Jupiter is going to go into Cancer. So there's just going to be this like really deep healing of the maternal line potential. Jupiter doesn't hunt you down like those other planets do. You have to step towards the work with Jupiter, but it is like that mother relationship and your relationship with the divine mother and how you take care of yourself and all of that. And then we have Saturn and Neptune. They're teasing out a conjunction through 2025 in Pisces, but they actually come into a conjunction in 2026. And this one only happens, it's quite rare, decades in between, maybe more than 3 decades between. I would have to actually look it up, but longer than 3 decades between when these guys come into a conjunction again. And there's always significant events that happen. This one, I'm predicting a lot of truth coming out, like a lot of the illusion, just the veil being pulled back. And we're just going to get to this point in 2026 where, I hate to bring in any trigger words, but like a conspiracy theory, it's not a theory. It's just what was actually happening, or or when somebody thought, oh, that's so crazy that you would think that watching the sunrise would help your hormones. Like that's nuts. Somebody came on my page and was like, you pseudoscience. I was like, you don't think that
I get it all the time. I get it all the time. I know. Somebody just said it to me in the last couple of days, and I forget who it was, or maybe I saw it on social media. Sometimes I can't tell the difference between the two, but it was like, sometimes being crazy is just being right too early.
Mm-hmm. And so I think by 2026, by the end of 2026 into 2027, we're going to have a much firmer grasp on some of the things that were confused, that were intentionally, we were being confused about, because Neptune
Yeah.
in Pisces, where it's been for the last 12 years, that is, okay, so Neptune rules media, theater, the arts. It also rules any mind-altering substance. So you look at like anything from ayahuasca to like Prozac. It's all in the realm of
Alcohol.
all of
Yeah.
it. It's all there. Even like psychological abuse or emotional abuse, it could go in that world. And it was in Pisces, and Pisces is like the illusion, like, either there's extremes. Either you're like so tapped in and psychic while that's happening, or you're completely confused and like a victim to the propaganda machine. And you just look out into the world and you can see, if anybody like takes a step out and starts to look from two sides perspective with any sort of critical thinking, you can see like we are intentionally being confused, and that's going to change.
Yeah.
That's going to change. Saturn's going to come around and be like,
Interesting.
smarten up, children. Let's go. Get in line.
Interesting. Well, I look forward to that. That's caused a lot of conflict
A lot of
because there's the people that have started to see through the illusion earlier than the others. And so I feel like that is what is the source of so much, so much conflict, right? How deep have you gone into human design?
I made a decision because there's so much to learn in astrology. And for a minute, I was like, I'm going to study human design too. And then I was like, nope, because I actually there's a vein of astrology that I'm just dipping my toes into right now that I want to go deeper. And I decided not to go. But I do know that he talks about the great, what does he call it? Morphogenetic shift in 2027.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was gonna ask you, is like, where's the overlap of that? Because I haven't gone too deep into it either. I mean, I have the book, I'm a little bit familiar with it, but I certainly wouldn't call myself like a thorough student, right? But I also know there's this conversation of not just the evolution of consciousness, but consciousness in relationship to like our DNA,
That's right.
more of our DNA coming online, changes to the actual chakra system. And there have also been some recent changes as well. There's going to be basically like a new version of a human, right? So
see,
Alexis is deep into that.
Astrologically,
so
I see it as a split, pardon me. Astrologically, I see it as a split. So Uranus and Gemini, the power of the mind, just to flip back to, I was talking about the biology of belief with Bruce Lipton. We know that when you change your beliefs, your biology actually changes, right?
Yes.
And we know that if you are able to change if you're actually able to change, like we can do a lot just by working with the mind. Well, Uranus is moving through Gemini. Gemini is the polarity. It is the split. It is the duality. And so as Uranus goes through Gemini, I see this significant split happening. That's like a split in consciousness, which essentially evolves us in different ways. And so human design sees the way that they do, but they're also using astrology. So I am really curious to go in deeper, and I keep thinking I'm going to, and I just don't. And I don't know why exactly, because I am very curious to know, but I haven't. But I just saw a thing. Somebody was talking about the telepathy tapes, and they said that Ra, who is like the original channel of the human design modality, said that it had to do with the autistic kids. So I don't know. Now I want to go in a little deeper. Like maybe they're way showers, right?
Yeah, I feel like they are. They're definitely special souls. But what I was going to say is that Alexis, who's also coming on the podcast and is on my team, who you need to meet, by the way, I'll introduce you. She has a deep background in astrology and is also going really deep in human design. So I think that I'll probably bring that up, and we'll talk about that and her perspective on that. Because so from where I sit, like my objective with Japa Health is to bring the idea of consciousness into the conversation around chronic health, and to have a very clear strategy of managing your health through embodiment work and intentional energy, right? Like being aware of your consciousness, being aware of your belief, being aware of your shadows, and using that as like the primary basis for how you navigate your health, rather than like a biochemical model, right? So all these different pieces of everything that it all matters, right? And the way that I see it is that we're just kind of, although it's going to accelerate quickly, And that's why I was really excited to hear your perspective on the actual timeline, although none of us really know,
Yeah,
right?
right.
The way I see it is that spiritual health and consciousness will become like the next main, that and mitochondrial health, which definitely have an interconnected relationship. And it was interesting that you brought up healing the mother wound, because you inherit all of your mitochondria from your mother.
Yes.
So I see all these pieces so interconnected. And I definitely have this vision, which is why I created an algorithm for it and an assessment for it, so that we can start to connect the dots between our shadows, our traumas, our frequency, and our chronic conditions and our
Yeah.
symptoms. And to be able to create a strategy in life for ascending our consciousness, being more embodied, and then also translating that into greater health, greater energy, better hormone balance, better digestion, and like all these things that we want in the physical body that I think we've been looking at purely through the lens of the material. And that is about to shift.
Yes. Well,
Mm-hmm.
astrologically, we just had 200 years of materialism being dominant, and we are now in 200 years of energetics, frequency, mind, beliefs, that all being dominant. So we're just at the, like 2020 was the beginning of that. Like we are just getting started into this 200-year cycle of energetics being the main thing. So everything is tracking on time. I mean, part of the other thing that I've been really fascinated with is electromagnetic fields, right? Like light electromagnetic fields. And I was studying with this brilliant man. He's in Norway. His name is Jan Polzinski, pardon me. And he doesn't have a lot out there. So the little pieces, I got to interview him and I got to use some of his work. But he was talking about how there is a like your electromagnetic field essentially holds your mother and your father and your grandma, like all your ancestors in your electromagnetic field. And there are devices now, that's the computer that I need to open up next to me. There are devices now that you can use to connect into the electromagnetic field and actually find the original electromagnetic imprint of anything that's manifesting today. So I had my mom when she was in her final stages of life. I had her connected into one of these machines that I purchased at a distance. And the interview, like the intake experience was literally just, what are you trying to address today? Okay, how old are you? Give me a little bit of your health history, blah, blah, blah. And my mom had just had a stroke, like a series of really tiny strokes. So she still was actually in pretty good shape. But she had the left face paralysis and she's, nobody wants that. And so she was like, can we fix this? Anyways, and he does this analysis at a distance, because in the quantum, like once she was entangled with the machine, he could see, and he sends her back this letter, like a report. And in the report, he says the origin of this stroke was when her father was 14 years old. He experienced a trauma that caused him to become overly responsible, and a few other details. And my mom read it and she just started crying because his mother died when she was 14, or when he was 14. So her grandmother died when her father was 14 years old, and her dad actually had a stroke. And she didn't tell him that. And there was other details.
Yeah. So how
did he know that?
He couldn't
There's
know that. Yeah, he couldn't.
Exactly. And so like the fact that we can go in, and then he sent her like a frequency program that she could run that would help to reset her, like using microcurrent, that would help to reset her electromagnetic field. And literally these programs were an hour long. She put the little device on and we'd watch her face start to get better in that hour. And she could only run it once a day, because that's like, you don't want to overwhelm the body with too much. And she was like, can we do it again? Like she wanted it, because every time
it was working.
And it took 3 days of her running the program to get her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Like just incredible. Yeah. And so, yeah, this is my, and they actually have a whole astrology database. So I want to start doing these like quantum astrological readings where I'm actually hooking this device, like connecting you to this device. We can look at whatever's going on in your life. We can find the origin of it, and then we can work with the stars. And I'm super
Mhm.
stoked. This is actually the first time I'm saying this publicly because I've just kind of been behind the scenes
Oh,
about it, but yeah, this is where I'm headed.
but this is where I see everything going.
Mhm.
Undeniably, from my perspective anyway. I mean, other people might have a different view of where they see the collective going. Have you explored the work of Eileen? I think the way she pronounced her name is Muxcock.
No, this is new to
Muxcock.
me.
So she wrote, I might be mispronouncing her name, but I would like to reach out to her actually and get her on. She's amazing. She wrote a book called Electric Body, Electric
Oh, I've
Health.
heard this book. Yes.
Yeah, with the tuning
Yes.
fork.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what was coming up for me when you were describing, the auric field, because in her book she describes that she used tuning forks as a
Yes.
practice to um, figure out where there were pockets of stuck energy in people's fields, and she recognized patterns over time after using tuning forks on people, hundreds of times, and she would notice that like at a certain distance away from the body, at like a certain part of the body was always like a certain story in somebody's life. Okay, so like this would be your mother, or this would be your father, this would be your grandfather. And so maybe it was like 6 inches away from the right shoulder. And I'm not remembering all the
Yeah.
details, but she basically mapped. Yeah, I'm probably butchering all of it, but different stories essentially live according to her and her work and her research and all of the people that she's worked on that have validated her findings and she's had conversations with by using the tuning
Yeah.
fork, that she's basically been able to map the
Yeah.
biofield and like where things are living in your aura. And I fully believe that like the imprints of what we attract in our life live in our auric
Mhm.
fields, and there's probably better ways to change those imprints and change our experience and our reality than just through like the forceful attempts that we've been like sitting in therapy,
Yeah.
or even psychedelic experiences, or even the yoga and the meditation. Like there's probably more efficient ways to do that we haven't quite figured out the technology for yet.
Yes. 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 And yes. And yes. I think this is also exciting. I do have a strong belief, and I may be wrong, but I do have a strong belief that our movement matters, like the Yoga Nidra, the meditation. I think these ancient practices are going to be used in harmony, because if you don't actually change your behaviors, it doesn't matter what kind of frequency, tuning forks, singing bowls, microcurrent, electromagnetic fields, like PEMF, all these things.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter how much, if you're not changing your behavior, they'll only adjust you temporarily. You'll go back. Like you are the
Yeah.
original frequency device. And so we do
Yes.
need to
Hmm.
work in collaboration with all of this external technology. Like it's so funny, I'm wearing these they're phototherapy patches, and I have a few different ones, and they have a lot they have like cardiovascular doctors that are really interested in these, because it's helping with all the onset of all this heart stuff that's going on, and they're having really
Yeah.
incredible results. But even the doctors are like, okay, but if you're still eating like and you're still not moving,
Yeah.
it can't help you. So it's a collaborative effort in
Hmm.
everything that we're doing. And even like I used the Healy device quite a bit. If I wasn't
Hmm.
participating with it, it wasn't able to help me as much. Like my son had head to toe eczema. Like I was spending like
Hmm.
2 hours a day on his body just caring for his skin. And the frequency device after 2 weeks halted the flare up, and after like 3 months he was totally clear. But if I feed him the foods that he's allergic to, he has a flare up again, no matter how many times I run the
Yeah.
frequency device, right?
Yeah. So it's an
It's
ally,
an
right? Like
ally.
these are allies for us,
Yes.
but we can't give them all our
Right.
power.
But like diet alone didn't get him there. It was like the two of them together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I totally feel that. Because diet alone didn't fix me either, right? Like, so I had Hashimoto's, I had autoimmune thyroid disease. And I have some suspicions that, because it's multifactorial, right?
Mhm.
Like, there's never just one reason why these things happen,
Exactly.
right? So the treatment, the solution also has to be multifactorial.
Right.
It's not like you can just do one thing. And when anybody ever, I'm always suspect of when it's like, oh, this one thing cured me. I'm like,
No, 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 no.
I don't think so. Yeah, yeah, I don't think so. Because I have suspicions that things that I was exposed to, including childhood vaccines and other things in my entire early life contributed to it, right? And then the way that I was eating and living when I was in my adulthood also, and things like birth control and overuse of antibiotics, and then
Living in a
working in an
city.
office environment.
Yeah.
Yes, and like working in an office environment under fluorescent lights with people that I didn't like, living out of alignment with my purpose. Like there's just too many of these things that you can't just farm out your power to, like you said, like a sound bowl, right?
Yeah.
And say like, okay, I'm just going to meditate with the sound bowls every day and that's going to fix me. You have to do
You have to
everything.
change your life.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to do,
You
yes.
even
You have
like
to change your orientation to life.
exactly. Like even you watched that documentary Heal, that was so great. It was like these people actually like basically lifted up out of their life and like transplanted into another life because they had to change so many factors to have that miracle. It's
Yeah.
and we also see the power of community and the power of your relationships. The quality of heart really matters, you know, and I don't mean the physical beating heart, although that matters, but like your heart. Like,
No, yeah, but
do you have the capacity for
yeah.
love? Are you generous? Do you have empathy? You know,
Hmm.
are you running from a baseline of kindness? These things matter.
Yeah, the heart as a sense organ, not as a valve, but as a sense organ.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then also like the consciousness of each of our organs, like the more that information comes online as well. And I love
Hmm.
Chinese medicine for that, you know, like my girlfriend is just so brilliant at describing, you know, the spirit of the liver like leaves you every night and comes back and it's in charge of all the things that it's in charge of, like direction and you know, and like that kind of stuff, it's not new. That's the
No,
thing
it's just
about
been
most of this. It's
forgotten.
not new. It's just being understood in a different way. Technology's meeting it. That's where I said before, it's like part of it is technology, but part of it is the returning to the ancient. Because Aquarius, if
Hmm.
I go back to astrology for a second, Aquarius and Pluto,
Yeah.
Aquarius is the time traveler. So time is a construct of the human mind. But when you and
Hmm.
they talk about this in the telepathy tapes about time, like you have a timeline in order to make sense of this experience, but all times are happening simultaneously. So sure, you have past lives, but they're
Yeah.
also happening right now. And so time, we're bringing back this ancient and then bringing in technology. My retreats are called Ancient Future because I really believe that it's like the two coming
Oh, I
together
love
to
that.
right now. And that's where we really advance, is like remembering who we were to remember where we're going.
Well, that's what I feel like a quantum leap is. Like when you're able to make like a major shift in your life, um, in any capacity, whether it's like relationships, health, finances, like it doesn't really matter, like a project that you're working on. It's I always feel like it's literally a timeline shift
Mm.
because you can stay on an existing timeline where maybe you feel stuck or whatever. And like getting out of that timeline is like a shift in frequency.
Yeah.
But like all those possibilities exist in the quantum field at any given moment.
Yeah.
It's a matter of tuning into and accessing that the coordinates of whatever that frequency is.
So my teacher who's teaching me about all this quantum stuff said that a quantum leap actually isn't a giant leap. It's a series of microscopic changes that all of a sudden it's like it
Mm.
unlocks a thing and all of a sudden you're like boop in a new frequency. But you have to like get all these
Yeah,
little
yeah.
microscopic changes, like shifts come in first, and then it's like and I just thought that was so
Jack
great.
Cruz says something like that. Yeah, Jack Cruz says something like slowly and then all of the sudden or something. I have to go back and look at what he says, but I really feel that because I've been working on building the Japa Health Tech platform and getting it ready for the world. And there's been so much of like all this little work, little work, little work, little work, little work.
Mhm.
And it's like about to blast off.
Mhm.
And so I really resonate with that personally. But back to
Yeah.
astrology, before we go, because I'm loving this conversation. But I know we can't stay all day. Um, something that I feel as a woman very viscerally is the connection to the moon.
Mm.
And a big aspect of, I think, what causes um, issues with collective consciousness, human health, frustration, disconnection is birth control, right? Like this idea that women are such important catalysts for consciousness as part of the collective, right? Like the female, the divine feminine. And I don't remember the statistic off the top of my head, but it's an unbelievable amount of women of their fertile years that are chemically suppressing their cycles. And when I stopped taking birth control, I had a spiritual awakening.
Mm.
Like I was like I woke up. It was like I was like, where was I? You
Wow.
know? And as I got healthier and stepped away from the paradigms that were part of what was contributing to my sickness and my disease and my suffering, and reoriented myself more towards nature, more towards circadian rhythms, natural cycles of light and dark, natural cycles of the seasons, right? Like natural cycles of my cycle every month, right? Like living in alignment with that. I cycle with the moon
Mm.
every single month.
Mm.
And whenever anybody expresses skepticism about the power of astrology or the power of the moon, even in my limited understanding of it, like I'm nowhere near, as knowledgeable as you are, it's like ask any woman, right? About our connection to the stars, and it's like, have you ever seen that meme that said um, like if your dick would bleed on the waxing moon or whatever, then you'd have a better perspective too, right? But I mean, today it's a new moon. I started bleeding last night,
Amazing.
and it's like these are the kinds of connections that are undeniable when your vessel is clear, if there's no interference, and you're connected to nature. But I'm curious about your perspective about this connection between, and I'm sure because I'm not living in a male body, I don't know, I don't have the embodied experience, but I'm sure they have their own relationship and they have their own patterns that they're experiencing in relation to the cosmos too. But from like a female perspective, it's undeniable because we've got this cycle, right? This fertility cycle with the moon. But like I'd just love to hear you share some of your perspective on that.
Well, you know who really pays attention to the moon, whether they realize it or not, is like the whole entire world surf community.
Yeah,
Right? Because the
that's
moon
funny.
controls the tides. And
Mhm.
anybody who's paying attention to water has a relationship with the moon, and it's cyclical.
Mhm.
But I also another population of people who have a big respect for the moon that maybe don't believe in astrology, or maybe they do, are biodynamic farmers, because they've
Mhm.
actually shown that the nutrient value in the bounty of the harvest is directly linked to the timing of like planting the seeds and doing your like biodynamic farming has a huge component of the lunar cycle involved in it if you're doing it right, right? And so,
Yeah,
it only takes observation. It only takes observation to see that it's true.
truly.
We're not actually trying to. I don't think we actually need to prove anything. We just need to watch. We just need to pay attention.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how do all the furry animals of the north know to build a bigger coat as it gets cold? And how do they, like it's everything is responding to nature, like this spring fever and the mating patterns of animals in the wild. Like
Mhm.
this is all nature based reactions in the body. People are like, nature has nothing to do with the endocrine system. Like, really? Tell that to the
Yeah, yeah.
tell that to the elk. Tell that to the dolphins. Tell that to the, right?
Right.
Like it's just there. And
Or even women that like ovulate and bleed on the cycles of the moon.
right.
Like, how can you deny that?
I mean, I have a 26-day cycle and I always have. It's like 25 or 26 days. So I don't bleed consistently with the moon, but I bleed consistently with my 25 or 26-day cycle. So, and
Mm.
I just think that I'm meant to experience all of the different relationships of all like the moon cycle. I don't know. And I also have 0 planets retrograde, and I also talk really fast. And I'm also like, that's just kind of my vibe. Um, so I think, yeah, I think it's a game of observation. That's all astrology really is. It's you observe and you see patterns. You observe and you see
The
patterns.
patterns.
And
Yeah.
I actually am starting to really gear my new moon circles towards entrepreneurs using that same kind of
Mm.
theory of biodynamic farmers. Like if I'm working with the lunar cycle, the bounty of my work is going to be more abundant when I'm working with the cycles of the moon. And then also, like you said, you bleed with the new moon. Well, if I just, you know, schedule rest into my life around the new moon and I schedule more outward movement of energy around the full moon, then I'm going to be scheduling rest into my life, like I'm not going to have the same burnout. I had a student when I
Yeah.
was living in LA who was a LAPD officer, and she told me that they schedule more officers at the full moon because there's more
Yeah.
problems. And I was like, okay, so the
Yeah.
LAPD is also paying attention to the lunar cycle and seeing how the population is affected
Yeah.
by this. And she told me, and I haven't had this validated by somebody in like emergency or urgent care, but like there's more people needing care and like,
Oh, I'm sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so it is just observation. We're not putting anything on anything. We're just observing the natural response to these cycles.
Yeah. I love that you said that. You don't necessarily need to be living your life according to your cycle. I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about females, right? But like if you just actually schedule your life according to the moon, then you'll feel more in alignment
Yeah.
with nature.
Yes. And
Yeah.
also, if we look at the moon as far back as we have recorded history, like when nomadic tribes, they knew to like take more shelter around the new moon. And when the full moon was happening, they could travel later in the night, and they used it as a timekeeper, right? Like it was
Yeah.
before clocks and calendars, we would use the moon as a metronome of time, like that cycle of time. And so
Mhm.
I actually have a bit of a beef with the Gregorian calendar because it takes us out of step with nature,
Me
you
too.
know? So
Yeah, me too. I do too.
there's
Yeah.
so
It's
many.
like why are we celebrating the new year in the middle of the winter when the days are the shortest and coldest? That's not when we should be starting new projects.
No, but it is a good
You
time to
know?
be visioning them. It is a good time to be like working
Sure.
strategically and like doing the planning, but you're not taking action necessarily. You're just in this more of a dream space of what's possible and what's exciting you and what's turning you on, and like to build that vision and to
Mhm.
like map out your year. It actually is aligned astrologically with the new year, but it's not like New Year's resolutions. That doesn't make sense. Do not start a workout plan on
No.
January 1st. You're going to make it till like the 15th and be done with it. It's
Yeah.
just not aligned.
Yeah. No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. But I mean, since I've started living my life in alignment with the seasons and the cycles of nature, it, I mean, there's no way to ever unsee it or go back.
That's right.
It's impossible. And the more you do it, the more sensitive you become to it. I believe this has been my experience and so many people around me, that it becomes a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
And a priority.
Mhm.
It's like how I eat, move, breathe, work, play, everything is structured around it,
Yeah.
right? And it feels so much better. It feels so much more easeful.
Yeah. Well, and I've been following the new moons, hosted New Moon Circle for over a decade now, and participated in New Moon Circles longer than that. And even if you don't believe in astrology, just the themes, like you will look at 12 different themes
Mm,
in a pattern every year that are super relevant to your life. So it's an organizing mechanism as well. So you don't have to
mhm.
necessarily believe that Saturn is, or like, yeah, Saturn's going to punish you for being out of integrity, or that Mercury has some
Right.
sort of impact on your travel plans. Like you don't need to believe that. But even just looking at what it's asking you to reflect upon thematically is going to take you on this really beautiful journey of life. And we cover all areas of life. Like nothing is excluded. We include the shadow, we include sex, we include money, we include parenthood, we include your inner child, we include God, we include, innovation and
Yeah.
responsibility and reputation and relationships and personal development and creativity and art and communication and community and your values. Like it's all there. And I didn't even
And where
cover it
else can
all.
you find that?
What's up?
Yeah. And where else can you find that? Like, I think that so many people are searching for some way to connect to their own personal development in a structured way that will like make them feel like they're making progress, right? Like they have some semblance of like a methodology, right? Like how do I figure myself out?
Yeah.
How? So for no other reason, it seems so comprehensive
Yeah.
and such an accessible way.
Yeah. The way I
Yeah.
really found astrology, to go back to your original question, maybe, um, I had been following John Friend in Anusara Yoga, and he fell from
Mm,
grace. And at the same time, I
Yeah.
had like a bit of a separation experience with another teacher, and I was searching for a teacher. And I didn't have, like, I just wasn't finding any teachers that I really loved. And instead, I looked to the stars and I was like, this is the best teacher. It's like a benevolent, non-biased teacher that's guiding me of what to look at within myself and to
Yeah.
self-reflect and like grow through. It is
That's
the ultimate
beautiful.
coach.
Because especially in the spiritual community, I mean, I feel like I just saw my whole life flash before my eyes when you mentioned his name because we've known so many of these
Mhm.
teachers, these gurus, right? That they have a very terrible dark side. They have abusive tendencies, narcissistic tendencies. Some of them are pretty bad,
Yeah.
but you can't find that in astrology. I mean, it's just your interpretation of the observation, right? And the patterns
Yeah.
and what it's calling you to explore.
Yeah. And they're not going to sexually abuse you. They're not going to
No,
put you in, like power dynamics.
no.
It's just this really, but I think of it as a benevolent guide. And it really comes
I
down
love that.
to understanding how to interpret it. So the interpreter is really important.
Yeah,
Understanding the
yeah.
language. I do this course, it's called the Moonwalk course, and it's to help you understand your own relationship with the moon. And I did it the first
Mm,
time in 2020 when everybody was at home. It was like a pretty intense time. It was pre-vaccine, post shutdown in that window there.
yeah,
And everybody that took the course, I think I had like 350 some people sign up for it. Not everybody finished it, as online courses
yeah.
go, but everybody that reaches out to me that finished it, they just talk about how big of an impact having a more intimate relationship with self-observation in reflection of the lunar cycle, and how much it impacted them to be more empowered in their choices in their way in their life. And I really, that one's coming back this year. That course is coming back this year.
Well, I feel like one of the reasons why people suffer these days is because nobody looks up,
Mm.
right? So we're looking down at, like, we've
Oh,
got the small screen, right? Like we're looking down and we're so myopically focused that even just the simple shift of starting to contemplate what's up there will take us out of the trap of falling into these places that, the online conversations, the scrolling, the just forgetting about what's actually happening in nature.
yeah,
And I love that you mentioned that you grew up in a place that was so rural that you actually had an appreciation for the night sky,
yeah,
because it's something that we talk about at Joppa Health, because, we teach about light biology and quantum biology, right? And how light influences our physiology so much,
hmm,
right? And we have this concept that because of light pollution and the fact that we are working at night and that we're able to be under like a fake sun at night, that in itself disconnects us from the cosmos because we can't see it.
yeah.
There's no awe, there's no magic. So just the invitation, and thank you for coming on to talk about this,
Mm.
just the invitation to consider what's going on up there can help, I think, stop the madness of being sucked into like the small world all the time and just take a break from that, take a break from the toxicity of all of that, and go outside and look up
Yeah,
because it really is beautiful.
yeah. And as a baseline starting place, the sunrises and the sunsets, and just look at the moon, whether it's day or night. Like,
Right?
just start that. Before I was even into astrology, I just started making a point of observing the moon, like actually watching the phases. Like, when is the moon
Yeah.
rising? When is the moon
Yep.
setting? What part of the cycle? Like on the new moon or the full moon? Like, where is it? Like leading up to the new moon and leading up to the full moon? Where is it in the sky? And it's really simple because you don't need a teacher. You just go watch.
You just go
You
watch
just
it
go
and it
watch.
starts to beg bigger questions.
Yeah.
It's like the gateway drug, I think,
Yeah.
into spirituality. It's like just looking up at the sky
Mhm.
is such an awe-inspiring experience. I mean, hopefully it's not going to be, oh my God, there's all the chemtrails and all that, It's like if you find yourself in a place where it is beautiful,
Yeah.
it can change your whole freaking life, man.
Yeah.
Because I don't remember what it is, something like we spend 97% of people spend 97% of their time indoors or something ridiculous like that. Don't quote me on that, but it's something like that, you know?
Yeah.
And so how can we have an appreciation for astrology if we're that disconnected just from the freaking sky, man?
You know what?
And that's what our ancestors did.
That's what they
That's
did.
what they did is
Look
they,
at the sky.
that's what they
That's how
did.
they navigated.
Yeah.
That's how they knew where to
Yeah.
go. Just a little side story to close. I was at a wedding in on the Baja Peninsula in Mexico, and there was a just by fluke of timing, the party was on a beach, and there was lights there to, you know, create a vibe, but you could walk out to the beach and the stars were just ridiculous. And one of the guests of the wedding, who I've only met a few times, happened to walk out at a very similar time as I had, and he's an adult. I bet he's 40s or 50s. He'd never seen the night sky because he's a New Yorker, you know, you can't see the sky like that.
Oh my God.
And I got to witness him like freaking out about like, oh.
And I imagine it wasn't even as profound as if you like went out into the desert, like far away from civilization.
It was pretty profound. It was pretty amazing.
It was.
I will say that.
Oh.
It was pretty amazing. But like he freaked out, and I witnessed it. And as somebody who grew up with that, I was just like, oh yeah, this isn't normal.
Yeah.
Isn't normal.
Right.
For some people.
For most people. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can tell I moved to the woods.
Me too.
And it's been a game changer, you know. And I was telling you before we started recording that I talked to Molly Engelhart, and she was living in LA, grew up in LA, and had this whole spiritual awakening when she left the city too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, nature wins, man.
Nature wins.
Nature wins.
Yeah.
Nature wins.
But
yeah, I love it. I love being out here. I have this amazing microphone that enables you to be able to hear me loud and clear, but it also filters out background noise, which is kind of a bummer because the jungle sounds that come from behind me,
yeah.
You can't hear it, but I hear it the whole time. And I'm like smiling inside because like I hear all these creatures and birds, and it's like a trip all the time.
The best.
Yeah. It's like nature's sound bath. Yeah. I love it. And I love you. And I'm so glad that we reconnected. And offline, I want to talk a little bit more about any way that I could get some of your amazing magical wisdom involved in Japa Health, because I love everything that you do and you talk about.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Amazing.
I'd love to.
Well, thank you so much.
Where can people find you?
What's that?
Where can people find you? Oh, you're welcome.
Okay. So I have my, I synthesized Yoga Nidra and astrology together, and I created the Astro Nidras, and I have a website called attunetothemoon.com, and it's built off not the clock and the calendar. It's built off the stars, the position of the stars. So every time you log in, you only see practices that are relevant to help attune you to today's astrology. It's pretty cool. I love it. And I do new moon circles through there and other astrological education. So Attune to the Moon. And then my website is just my name, janaroemer.com. On there, you'll find Yoga Nidra trainings. You'll find retreats. You'll find links to the other place that you can find me, which is Insight Timer, which is a free downloadable app. I have some free content. They do have a paid version. I've got a course on there. I've got some other stuff on there as well. And then you can always Google, like you can search me on YouTube, and I've got Yoga Nidra practices on there as well. So I'm pretty easy to find. Insight or Instagram is, I've got in Attune to the Moon or Jana_Roemer. And yeah, that's basically it. I'm highly
So what do you have coming up next?
What's that?
Yeah. Do you have like any major event coming up next? Like anything that you're promoting, or like what's on the calendar?
Yeah, I'm just about to announce a retreat in Greece.
Ooh, I've been wanting to go
May
there.
25th to June 1st. It's a small group of people. We actually work, I don't do any medicine, but I work with a woman that serves Bufo. And so I do all the like the prep work and the integration using the practice of Yoga Nidra. She also guides breath work. And then I do a little bit of astrology, and we do it somewhere gorgeous so you can really relax and be fed well. And then I'm actually bringing people up to Canada, where I live in the Kootenays, which is a bit out of the way, but super magical and really worth your time. So I'm for sure having 2 retreats, maybe 3 retreats this year. And then nothing else is scheduled, but I will have a Yoga Nidra training this year, and I will have the Moonwalk course. They're all going to get scheduled in the next 2 weeks. I'm trying to honor the astrology. It's not time to write it down yet. It's not time.
Right. And I can vouch for you. I mean, I feel pretty confident in saying that anybody that works with you is going to have a really powerful experience
Thank you.
for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, deeply transformative and meaningful for
Thank
sure.
you.
And I'd like to experience one of them myself again
Yeah,
soon.
I would love that too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
All right, well, thanks for being here. I'll make sure I link all that stuff for everybody, and we'll talk soon about more
I
collaboration.
love it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Okay.